away its content free because it didn't take it seriously. We still believe there was going to be paper and print in ink forever. And then same amount of that with the thing. And now we're running AI. Newspapers tend to resist fundamental change, and they're not going to be able to escape from AI. They're not going to be able to escape from gig work. They have to adapt. There will be newspapers like we're not going to be on sheets of paper. I know in England, the UK, you guys love newspapers, but in the United States, the only ones that are going to make the money are the ones that have a strong web presence. Well, AI is not going to replace good reporting. And American newspapers are not exactly covered themselves in glory the last few years. Newspaper reporting is getting the information telling us.
I mean, just
AI can help, but it can't replace.
absolutely. Just to be clear, then, I mean, it's not just reporters. Of course, there's all kinds of industries where AI could be stepping in, isn't it? I mean, it's so many sectors.
Yes, but there's an argument that AI will create as many jobs as it will destroy.
How scared are you? How scared are you, Mehmet Safra?
Well, I'm not scared. So the thing is that, as a political analyst, I get my insights after talking to real people. And, I get information that is exclusive to me. So, of course, AI is not going to get that. So if I'm going to give a political analysis, it's going to be based on my information and my insights. And that's something that AI will not be able to do.
Excellent. Good to hear. Mehmet Safra, a journalist and analyst there in Pakistan. My thanks to you for your time and your insights, and to the veteran Silicon Valley journalist Mike Malone. I'm Ed Butler. You have been listening to Business Matters here on the BBC World Service. Do stay with us.
This is the BBC World Service, where the stories that matter. The most tensely awaited presidential election in more than a decade.
BBC journalists are dedicated to capturing the news as and when it happens.
As government ministers arrived, the mood turned. There was anger, even from a soldier.
It was never an intention to show disrespect to any religious group.
News from the BBC World Service. In 30 minutes, it's TechLine. Here's Zoe Kleinman.
This week, how do we cope when the tech we rely on every day stops working? We'll explore the Bangladesh internet blackout, years of daily power outages in South Africa, and the Cuban game developers who work even when the electricity cuts off.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
BBC World Service, it's 1 o'clock GMT. This is Oliver Conway with the newsroom. President Biden welcomes the release of 16 detainees from Russia in the biggest prisoner swap since the Cold War. But a Russian hitman also goes free.
It feels all wrong to be trading people who are entirely innocent for, a convicted criminal, an assassin. But we wanted our man back. I think it puts governments in an impossible position.
The body of Ismail Haniyeh has arrived in Qatar for his burial 2 days after the Hamas leader was assassinated in Iran. The women's Olympic boxing match that's reignited the debate about gender in sport.
Could have been the match of my life, but I need to protect my life as well. I couldn't bear the pain.
As we now know, we lived in false hope for 4 days. The one redeeming thing that we can say is that at least we know they didn't suffer.
Looking back at the Titan sub disaster. First, our top stories.
Hello, I'm David Hull, BBC News. President Biden has hailed the largest prisoner swap between the West and Russia since the end of the Cold War as a feat of diplomacy. Following Turkey's mediation, 26 people, including the American journalists Evan Gershkovich and Alsum Komasheva, as well as the leading Kremlin critic Vladimir Kara-Murza, were exchanged in Ankara, a deal involving 7 countries. Jeremy Bowen is in Washington.
Our message is, first of all, that if you're going to do these kind of deals, it's going to be pretty pragmatic. The Germans were very involved because, of course, they had in one of their jails Putin's biggest prize, an assassin convicted of killing a Chechen dissident in Germany. Longer term, the message is that in our fractured and difficult world, this kind of thing might well happen again, because it's another way of putting pressure on your enemies, is to pick up some of their citizens and say, you can have them back at a price.
Presidents Brazil, Mexico and Colombia have called on Venezuela to release full details of last Sunday's disputed election in which the left-wing incumbent Nicolas Maduro has been declared the victor. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said it was clear the opposition candidate had won the most votes. David Bamford reports.
Venezuela's opposition says its own vote tally shows that its candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, received more than double the support of Mr. Maduro, in line with independent polling conducted before the contest. The leaders of Brazil, Mexico and Colombia have now issued a joint statement saying they were willing to help Venezuela in the search for an agreement. Mr. Maduro has said his party is ready to present all the vote tallies from the election, but has not given any time frame.
The leader of the Lebanon-based group Hezbollah has warned the Israelis they have no idea what red lines they have crossed, killing the top Hezbollah commander in Beirut, as well as the political head of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, in Tehran, two operations on Wednesday. His military advisor, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, said Hezbollah was considering its response. Bangladesh's law minister has defended the ban on Jamaat-e-Islami, the main Islamist party, and its student wing from participating in political activities. More than 200 people were killed in agitation last month over reservations in public jobs. Here's Anwar Etiology.
A leader of the Jamaat described the move to ban them as illegal, extrajudicial, and unconstitutional. The party was effectively barred from taking part in elections in 2013 after a court ruling that its registration as a political party conflicted with Bangladesh's secular constitution. Small and scattered protests have resumed in cities around Bangladesh this week, with students demanding justice for those killed in the clashes last month.
BBC News. Several people have been shot dead in the northern Nigerian city of Kano during protests about the cost of living. Some of the demonstrators were wounded and taken to hospital. Witnesses said they found spent cartridges and live bullets on the scene. The government has not made any comment. Rallies have been taking place in major cities against economic hardship. The World Health Organization says more than 175,000 people die in Europe annually from extreme heat. It says heat-related deaths in the region have seen a 30% increase over the past 2 decades as a result of global warming. Simone Biles has won the all-round gymnastics event at the Paris Olympics. It's her 6th career gold, extending her record as the most decorated American gymnast. Brazil's Rebecca Andrade took silver, and Biles' compatriot and defending champion Sunisa Lee settled for bronze. Biles looked totally in control throughout her final routine. These supporters were delighted with what they saw at the event.
She's amazing. She's so inspirational. We love her with all of our hearts. She inspires all of us in the USA. I love her. This is why I came to the Olympics, to see Simone Biles. And I got to see her!
Probably one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I literally loved it, and I feel like you'll never see something like that again. It's one of the most amazing and one-of-a-kind experiences of my life.
At age 27, she's the oldest winner of the event in more than 70 years. It's her second gold medal in Paris after winning the team event 2 days ago. Saudi Arabia has submitted plans to build a football stadium 350 metres above ground level as part of its bid to host the 2034 Men's World Cup. The proposed stadium in Neom, which is still an unbuilt city in the northwest of the country, will only be accessible via high-speed lifts and driverless vehicles. Saudi Arabia's bid to hold the competition is uncontested. And live from London, that is the latest. BBC News.
Thank you. You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with Oliver Conway. During the Cold War, the tended for the US. This was the reaction of the New York office of his employer, the Wall Street Journal, when they heard the news. The deal involved a total of 26 people, 10 Russians, including 2 children, being exchanged for 16 Westerners and dissident Russians imprisoned in Russia. It took place at an airport in the Turkish capital, Ankara, with 7 planes ferrying the prisoners from the US, Germany, Poland, Slovenia, and Norway, as well as Russia and Belarus. Our first report is from Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. He was out of jail, but not free yet. Reporter Evan Gershkovich and former US Marine Paul Whelan. He'd spent more than 5 years in a Russian prison. But this was the start of their journey to freedom. Along with other prisoners to be swapped, they were flown to Ankara Airport in Turkey. Those Moscow had released went one way. The Russians they'd been exchanged for boarded their plane home. As well as Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan, Moscow freed US-Russian journalist Alsu Kurmasheva. Also, prominent Kremlin critics, including Vladimir Kara-Murza, Oleg Orlov and Ilya Yashin, and an anti-war artist, Sasha Skachelenko, swapped, among others, for the convicted assassin Vadim Krasikov, identified by German officials as a Russian agent. Evan Gershkovich's boss says she's overjoyed to see her reporter free, but
it feels all wrong to be trading people who are entirely innocent for, a convicted criminal, an assassin. But we wanted our man back. Paul Whelan wanted his freedom, understandably. So I think it puts governments in an impossible position.
America accuses Moscow of jailing US citizens to trade them for Russians jailed abroad. For the families and friends of Evan Gershkovich, Paul Whelan, and dissidents like Vladimir Kara-Murza, this is a moment to celebrate. But keep in mind, for the Kremlin, it is mission accomplished. It got what it wanted. It got its agents back. For Moscow, the takeaway from all of this will be that hostage diplomacy works. And that means we're likely to see more of it. More prisoners here being used as bargaining chips. Tonight, President Putin gave a hero's welcome to the returning Russians, among them spies and sleeper agents. He clearly thinks he got a good deal. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. Well, the agreement was the culmination of months of painstaking diplomacy. It nearly collapsed following the suspicious death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny in February. He was supposed to have been included in the releases, but unconfirmed reports suggest Vladimir Putin wasn't happy with his possible release. He died soon after. In order for the deal to go ahead, the US had to persuade Germany to release FSB hitman Colonel Vadim Krasikov, known as the bicycle assassin. He'd been in jail in Germany since 2019 for the murder of a Chechen exile in a Berlin park. Amnesty International in Germany condemned what it called the bitter taste of swapping a convicted murderer for people who had simply exercised their right to free speech. But flanked by the families of the American prisoners, US President Joe Biden this afternoon welcomed the deal.
This is a very good effort. Very good effort. Today we're bringing home Paul, Evan, also Vladimir. 3 American citizens and 1 American green card holder. All 4 in prison unjustly in Russia. Paul for nearly 6 years. Vladimir since 2022. Evan since March of 2023. And also since October of 2023. Russian authorities arrested them, convicted them in show trials, and sentenced them to long prison terms. With absolutely no legitimate reason whatsoever. None.
Rumours that a swap might be imminent started circulating a few weeks ago after Evan Gershkovich was found guilty in a rushed court process in Russia. He'd been arrested by Russian security services in March last year while on a reporting trip to the city of Ekaterinburg. Gráinne McCarthy is one of his colleagues at the Wall Street Journal. This was her reaction to the news of his release.
We are absolutely elated and just our hearts are bursting with joy for Evan to see that he is free. We've just been able to see some images of him on the plane in Russia earlier today, and we've seen photographs of him on the American plane, and it's just the most amazing feeling. We've tried to remain optimistic all along, and the fact that the sham trial of Evan unfolded so quickly in Russia last month gave us cause to be optimistic, but nonetheless today was a nerve-wracking day because we still needed to hear that Evan was actually out of Russian custody and truly free. And, you know, in these kinds of situations, you're always nervous about what can go wrong at the last minute. So, yeah, it's just amazing to see it actually happening. It'll be an adjustment, but Evan's been an inspiration to us throughout this whole 16 months of his life. And he has remained strong mentally and physically in very, very trying circumstances. He's a very gregarious, brilliant journalist and an excellent friend to many people. And he has the most amazing family. And we've gotten to know them very well over these last 16 months. And he's on his way to see them now. So he can take whatever time he likes to recharge and to get back to his life.
Yeah, McCarthy of the Wall Street Journal. Well, that plane carrying Evan Gershkovich and the other Americans is due to arrive at Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington in a couple of hours. Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes now joins us. Peter, let's look at the political implications of this. Steve Rosenberg there in Russia said it was a win for Putin. Is this also a win for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris?
It's certainly a win for Joe Biden and, yes, Kamala Harris. And, of course, we are in the middle of the final few months, just under 3 months to the US presidential election. And anything like this, a major win on the international stage in the final few months of what will now we know be Joe Biden's only term in the White House, it is bound to be good for him in terms of his legacy. But perhaps more important, certainly for Kamala Harris, is her potential to win against Donald Trump in the election. And why is this important when some Americans might say to you, well, there's going to be a lot happening between now and the election. There are other issues that we'll be voting on, domestic issues, the economy, immigration, a lot of the personality politics going on at the moment. It is important because this is going to be a very close election, and any victory, any positive news that can be attached to the presumed candidate for Democrats, Kamala Harris, is bound to be good for her. So yes, it is being characterized as a win for the Vice President, but certainly and especially for Joe Biden, because he has said repeatedly over the last few months that one of his most important roles is to seek the freedom of those Americans detained overseas.
And yet the counter-argument is that it shows hostage diplomacy works. Even President Biden acknowledged that these people were arrested on trumped-up charges. What is to stop Russia and Belarus doing the same thing again?
That is the most worrying of issues. You're right, Joe Biden said they were convicted in show trials. And the US advice, the official advice, and the president actually said this earlier, is not to travel to places that could pose a danger. Now, there's no ban, and that's easier said than done, especially for journalists just carrying out their job in a place like Russia. So, in theory, really nothing to stop it happening again. And there are many informed experts here who believe it is only a matter of time before it does happen again, because certainly President Putin, this is a victory for him right now. He has got what he wanted. So this prisoner hostage diplomacy, call it what you like, has become, it's almost tragically the norm in terms of how Mr. Putin has been operating to get what he wants by playing these hostages or these prisoners up against foreign governments who have also something to gain by getting their people home.
It also shows the US ability to reach out to its allies to get their help. It involved lots of countries, not least Germany.
Yes, 7 countries. This was extremely complicated. We've got a sense of it from the reporting just now, how complicated this has been. This prisoner swap arrangement that was done through Ankara, but involved diplomatic discussions with a number of countries, and obviously, most crucially, diplomatic discussions involving the United States and Russia while the war in Ukraine is continuing. And on that basis, diplomatic relations couldn't be at a lower ebb. Yet these discussions have somehow still, in the background, managed to go ahead.
Peter, many thanks indeed. Peter Bowes there, live from the US. You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. The Hamas leader, Ismail Haniyeh, who was assassinated during a visit to Iran 2 days ago, is to be buried in the Gulf state of Qatar in the coming hours. Israel is widely suspected of killing him, but hasn't commented publicly. His coffin was greeted by Hamas members on the tarmac at Doha International Airport, from where our senior international correspondent, Paula Guerin, reports.
The Hamas leader, Ismail Haniyeh, will be buried here in Qatar, which has been his base for years, after prayers in Doha's biggest mosque. His remains were flown here from Tehran, where he was assassinated in the early hours of Wednesday. That killing has reverberated around the region. Iran's supreme leader, who prayed over his coffin, vowed that Israel would suffer a harsh punishment. There will be retaliation. The question is how severe, and at what point might the tit for tat escalate beyond control. Attempts to reach a ceasefire in Gaza may be another casualty of the assassination. Haniyeh was the lead negotiator for Hamas. Palestinian sources say he, more than other Hamas leaders, favoured a truce.
And that was Orla Guerin reporting. It is day 6 of the Olympics. Our sports reporter Paul Serres has given us a roundup of all the action from Paris, starting with another sensational performance from one of the greatest gymnasts of all time.
Simone Biles claimed the 6th gold and 9th medal of her Olympic career, winning the women's all-around competition as her self-proclaimed redemption tour continues at the Paris Games. Remember, Biles was forced to pull out of the Tokyo Games 3 years ago with a bout of the twisties, a disorientating mental block that has taken the USA to the team title and now won the all-around gold in her first 2 events in Paris, with 4 individual finals yet to come.
Team competition is always my favorite because we all get to go out there and compete together, and it's just such a fun time. But for me personally tonight, it means the world to me, and it's just so crazy. I don't want to compete with Rebecca no more. I'm tired. Like, she's way too close. I've never had an athlete that close, so it definitely put me on my toes, and it brought out the best athlete in myself. So I'm excited and proud to compete with her, but I don't like it no more. I'm getting uncomfortable, guys.
Biles was talking about Brazil's Rebeca Andrade, who took the silver, with Sunisa Lee of the USA winning bronze.
And another sporting legend was in action. Andy Murray calling time on his tennis career.
That's right, the 3-time Grand Slam winner and his partner Dan Evans were beaten in straight sets by the American pair of Tommy Paul and Taylor Fritz in the quarterfinals in Paris. Murray and Evans survived another match point. Remember, they had saved 7 in the opening 2 rounds before succumbing to defeat against the 3rd seeds on court Suzanne Lenglen at Roland Garros. Former world #1 Murray said after that he's ready for retirement.
I've been ready for this moment for the last few months, to be honest. I mean, since I had to have the operation on my back after Queen's before Wimbledon, I knew it was the right time. I feel lucky that I was able to come even to compete here, and, you know, obviously really grateful to Dan for putting in the effort that he did and preparing as best as he could to give us a good chance of having a great run here. But yeah, I'm looking forward to stopping now.
Murray beat Switzerland's Roger Federer in the final of the London Games in 2012 and the Argentinian Juan Martín del Potro in Rio de Janeiro 4 years later to become the only man to retain the Olympic tennis title in the history of the Games.
And so was any history made at the Games on Thursday? What else was happening in Paris?
Well, Ecuador won their first gold of the Games. Brian Pintado finishing the men's 20-kilometre race walk ahead of Brazil's Caio Bonfim and Spain's Alvaro Martin. And the Canadian swimmer Summer McIntosh was back among the medals, winning the women's 200-metre butterfly title in a new Olympic record time. And the best thing about it, Oliver, we do it all again on Friday. There are 23 gold medal events on day 7, including the first athletics title to be won on the track. That's the men's 10,000 metres.
Paul Serres. Well, among the sporting triumph, there was also controversy in Paris over a women's Olympic boxing match that's drawn in the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. She has criticised the International Olympic Committee after an Italian competitor, Angela Carini, was defeated in less than a minute by Algerian boxer Imane Elif, who had been disqualified during last year's Women's World Championships over testosterone levels. Dan Rowan reports from Paris.
Imane Khalif's first fight of these Paris Olympics was always going to be hugely controversial. The Algerian was allowed to compete in the women's boxing competition against Italian opponent Angela Carini, despite being disqualified from last year's World Championships for what the IOC says were elevated levels of testosterone. But an already divisive situation quickly escalated. Having been punched in the face, a clearly distressed Carini abandoned the fight after just 46 seconds. Later explaining that she couldn't bear the pain and had to preserve her life. But the row is set to intensify. Tomorrow, Taiwan's Lin Yuting, who like Khalif competed at the last Olympics, will also fight here, despite being stripped of a medal at last year's World Championships after failing a gender eligibility test. With the sport's Russia-led governing body suspended, the International Olympic Committee is running the boxing competition and insists both fighters have met their eligibility rules. Algeria's Olympic Committee, meanwhile, has condemned what it called unethical targeting and baseless attacks on Khalif, who's lost 9 times in a 50-fight career. But with testosterone levels linked to muscle size and strength, the fear is that a fighter could be badly hurt, and Karina's abandonment of her fight will only reinforce mounting questions facing the IOC over inclusion, fairness and safety.
Our sports editor Dan Rowan at the Olympics in Paris. When the Titan submersible disappeared in the North Atlantic just over a year ago, it was hoped the 5 people on board would return safe and sound. But days later, the wreckage of the OceanGate sub was found close to the wreck of the Titanic that the group had gone down to see. But what was that wait like for the people back on the surface? Science editor Rebecca Morrell spoke to one man who worked on a support vessel.
When the sub was overdue, we weren't unduly concerned because communications break down a lot in the ocean. But when the alarm was finally raised, that's when we realised that there were some serious issues.
Rory Golden was on the OceanGate expedition giving presentations about the Titanic. After the Titan submersible went missing, a major search and rescue operation was launched.
And a glimmer of hope in the search for the missing Titanic sub.
US Coast Guard has said underwater noises have been detected during the search for the missing mini-sub near the wreck of the Titanic.
A few days in, sounds of banging were detected underwater, raising hope that they were from the vessel. But Titan had imploded just a few hours into its dive.
As we now know, we lived in false hope for 4 days, and the one redeeming thing that we can say is that at least we know they didn't suffer, because we had this image in our heads of them being down there running out of oxygen in the freezing cold, getting terribly frightened and scared, and that was actually quite more frightening than the fact that we didn't know that they had died instantly.
Those who perished were British explorer Hamish Harding, the British-Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman, Stockton Rush, the CEO of OceanGate, and French diver P.H. Nargielé.
And he was a very special man, very generous in his imparting of knowledge of what he knew about the Titanic and other parts of the underwater world.
Rory Golden was a close friend of P.H. Nargielé.
I was one of the last to see him. He left the ship in great spirits and great form, and he was happy out. He was going to somewhere that he wanted to be.
Rory is now on the first expedition to the Titanic since Titan. It was an expedition PH was supposed to lead. Now a plaque is being laid at the wreck site to honour him. Rory had also visited the Titanic on the Titan sub.
I made a dive 2 years ago when I was on the OceanGate expeditions, and I'm here, and as are many others. I mean, that Titan had made 15 dives to the Titanic up to that point, so it had worked.
I mean, what do you think now about going in the sub? Do you wish you hadn't, or do you...
No, I don't wish that at all.
Does it not make you look back and think, oh, I was lucky that it was okay?
Yes, I was. It wasn't my time, So life is precious, and I got a second chance, because you never know when your time is going to come, and that certainly brought that home to all of us.
When the wreckage of Titan was finally found, those on board the Polar Prince knew all hope was gone.
Well, we all cried when the remains were found in the sub, And a special bond has been formed between all of us, all those who were on the ship that week, and that's a bond that will always be there.
Industry experts had raised many questions about the safety of the sub, and an investigation is still ongoing. It's likely to call for changes to ensure such a tragedy doesn't happen again.
A report by our science editor Rebecca Morrell. Returning now to our top story, the East-West prisoner swap, which took place in Turkey on Thursday after months of negotiations. What made the exchange so extraordinary is not just the fact that it involved 26 people across 7 countries, but that it happened at a time when relations between the West and Russia are at their lowest ebb since the Cold War. Our international editor Jeremy Bowen has this assessment.
In the hours since the exchange took place, many details are emerging of long and tortuous negotiations and clandestine meetings and messages written on paper delivered by hand to avoid digital surveillance. The Wall Street Journal has published a long account of the campaign to free its reporter, Evan Gershkovich. His mother Ella, born like his father in Russia, played a prominent role, even submitting to an interrogation by Russian security services in Moscow. The United States and Germany were the Western countries at the center of the saga. The Germans held the biggest prize for President Putin, the assassin Vadim Krasikov. President Biden was directly involved. The Wall Street Journal reports that about an hour before he announced he would not be running for re-election, the president rang the Prime Minister of Slovenia to finalize details in the case of two convicted Russian spies who were to be part of the exchange. It was a highly complex deal. In the end, it worked because each side had people the other wanted back. It was also pragmatic. Moral scruples about releasing a convicted killer as well as spies were rationalized and overcome. As well as a reminder of the way the world was during the Cold War, it might be a precedent for the future. In our troubled, fractured world, arresting foreign citizens for barter is yet another way of exerting pressure on an enemy.
Our international editor, Jeremy Bowen. Bit of business news for you. Stocks in Tokyo have fallen more than 5% after Wall Street shares tumbled over concerns over the US economy. The benchmark Nikkei 225 index is currently down 5.12%. It's at 36,175, down nearly 2,000 points. We'll have a news summary next, but that's it for now from the newsroom.
This is the BBC World Service, where Paul French is exploring how Hong Kong's history is slowly being changed or erased.
Things are going missing in Hong Kong, all kinds of things. Statues, museum exhibits, books, a lot of books, and newspapers.
Its entire archive just disappeared from the internet overnight.
The story of Hong Kong's beginnings, colonial past, and the crucial years since 2019's pro-democracy protests,
running street battles between protesters and riot police,
is slowly being rewritten by a government that needs to please the ruling Communist Party in Beijing.
It makes sense. If I were an authoritarian government, I would similarly turn off the people's memories.
I'll be finding out how the people are trying to resist and preserve their history from being lost, even under an increasing climate of fear.
Erasing Hong Kong, Thursday at 8:30 and 19 GMT.
You're listening to Tech Life with me, Zoe Kleinman. This week, what happens when a country of 170 million people loses internet access?
I personally couldn't connect with my parents for 10 days actually. The broadband internet was shut down for 5 days, but the mobile internet was shut down for 10 days.
And we look at some of the tech used in South Africa and Cuba to help people when the power cuts off for hours at a time. That's all to come after the latest world news.
BBC News with David Harper. A prisoner swap between Russia and the West, described as a feat of diplomacy by President Biden, has taken place. 26 people, including 2 children, were exchanged in Turkey. The US, Germany and other European nations participated on the one side, Russia and Belarus on the other. The Wall Street Journal confirmed its reporter, Evan Gershkovich, was among the journalists and dissidents being flown to the West. The leader of the Lebanon-based group Hezbollah has warned Israelis the group is considering retaliation for Israel's killing of a top Hezbollah commander in Beirut and the political head of Hamas. The United States says Venezuela's opposition candidate won Sunday's disputed election, despite the incumbent, Nicolas Maduro, being declared the victor. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said there was overwhelming evidence that Edmundo Gonzalez received the most votes. Brazil, Mexico and Colombia say Venezuela must release detailed voting data. Bangladesh's law minister has defended the ban on Jamaat-e-Islami the main Islamist party, and its student wing from participating in political activities. Speaking to the BBC, Anis al-Haq blamed its supporters for the violence during recent student-led protests over quotas in civil service jobs. Jamaat Islami denied involvement in the violence. Several people have been shot dead in the northern Nigerian city of Kano during protests over the cost of living. Spent cartridges of live bullets were found at the scene. The British tennis star Andy Murray's career has come to an end after he was knocked out of the men's doubles at the Olympics. During his career, he won 2 Wimbledon titles, 1 US Open title, and 2 Olympic golds. Saudi Arabia has submitted plans to build a football stadium 350 metres above ground level as part of its bid to host the 2034 Men's World Cup. The proposed stadium will be in Neom, a city yet to be built in the northwest of the country. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to Tech Life with me, Zoe Kleiman. If you're a regular listener, you'll know that in this programme we usually explore how technology around the world impacts our lives. But today we're looking at what happens when we lose access to the tech we've come to rely on every day. We're here from Bangladesh, where the government cut off internet access for more than a week to try and deal with violent civil unrest.
Only solution was like this muffled phone call. Also, if you send a text message, it doesn't reach the other end instantly because of the lower bandwidth.
We'll also go to a country which has been experiencing regular power outages for several years, South Africa, to learn how people adapted to blackouts and the tech which helps them keep the heating on.
There are a variety of ways to solve this mismatch, the most common being batteries, but batteries are really expensive.
And we'll hear from 2 game developers in Cuba who keep on working when the lights go out. Starting today's Tech Life with the violent political unrest in Bangladesh. For the past 2 weeks, anti-government protests, mostly starting on university campuses, have spread through the country. Clashes between the police and protesters have at times turned deadly.
3 of my friends are dead. See, there are blood stains on my hair. Why are my hands colored with the blood of my brothers?
More than 200 people have been killed. The government blames opposition parties and student activists for the violence. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina says she was forced to impose a curfew for public safety. We're talking about this on Tech Life because the government also imposed a communications blackout, cutting off internet access for over a week. The decision was criticised by the United Nations, which said it restricted rights to freedom of expression and freedom to share and receive information. After a 5-day full internet blackout, some broadband connectivity returns. Then 5 days after that, mobile data, used by the vast majority of Bangladeshis, slowly came back too. But the impact of the outage on everyday life and businesses has been enormous.
I do a small office job. Beside that, I offer rides on a bike rideshare service, as I can't maintain my family with my salary alone. When I offered rides through Uber and through other contracts, I would earn between $8 and $12 a day.
I spoke to a Bangladeshi software engineer in the UK, whose name we're not using for safety reasons, about the effect of the shutdown in his home country.
I personally couldn't connect with my parents for 10 days actually because the broadband internet was shut down for 5 days, but the mobile internet was shut down for 10 days. Also, like my only means of communication with my parents is Facebook, and social media sites are not there. Even only 2G and text messages are allowed throughout the blackout. So my only means of communication were like muffled phone calls.
That must be really stressful.
Yeah, on the other end of the phone, I can only realize that my parents picked up the phone. Okay, they're good. That's all.
So you know they're all right, but you can't speak to them properly.
That's right.
And how has this impacted people's lives and businesses?
All sorts of banking, even mobile recharge, ATM book. Like some people use this prepaid utility meter. Everything happened on a sudden. Their meters were involved in recharge.
So they couldn't top up their electricity?
Yeah. And Yeah, also Bangladesh is actually second biggest online labor community, and because of this situation, all on a sudden for 5 days, this freelancers community was isolated from the world. I don't know, this business is all about trust, this freelancing business. Their career is in threat. It for sure costs some anxiety. In long term, yeah, the client relationship is severely hampered.
Did people find a way around it?
Only way around, no, there were no way around it. Was the only solution was like this muffled phone call. Also, if you send a text message, it doesn't reach the other destination because of the lower bandwidth.
I see, so there was absolutely no way to circumvent it, you just had to live with it. Do you think it might happen again?
Gradually coming back to normal, but the social media websites are still not open. Students are using VPN to take care of that barrier. Now they have social media website using VPN. Now we see more footage, more videos of the incident, what happens for the blackout. With that, I think sentiment of the mass is going against the government. And with that, we don't know what's responding to this uncertainty. So anything can happen. It should have been resolved within a single day. The thought this will happen. So anything can happen. I don't know.
We've seen other regimes do this before, haven't we? I know that Iran also orchestrated a communications blackout a few years ago, and it said it was to try to quell unrest. Is that what the official line is here as well?
And exactly same. Yeah. So the student obviously they use the internet as a tool to communicate and coordinate their movement, and yeah, that was their goal.
Do you think there's a plan in case the communications end up dropping again?
I don't think because the alternate communication channels without this broadband or mobile internet is probably satellite-based connectivity, for example, like Starlink. But that also requires some infrastructures on the land. Bangladesh currently doesn't have that. I don't see any solution given the current infrastructure.
Listen, thank you so much for talking to us and sharing a really difficult experience. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Now, for more on what we know about the outage and how it was tracked, I spoke to John Graham Cummings, CTO at Cloudflare, an internet security and monitoring company.
We published data about the use of the internet, attacks, traffic patterns around the world and on networks around the world.
And how do you measure internet usage in individual countries?
Well, we run one of the largest global networks where we have computers, servers, data centers in over 300 cities in over 120 countries. And we handle a very large percentage of websites, for example. And that allows us to get a picture of the patterns in use across the internet, across the world.
And so when there's an outage, you must see it pretty instantly.
Absolutely, yes. There's a quite dramatic fall in traffic coming out of Bangladesh on July the 18th at 1500 UTC, essentially what looks like an almost complete shutdown of the internet.
I wanted to ask you whether you can measure the difference between, say, broadband connectivity and mobile.
Yes, and in fact, in this shutdown of Bangladesh, we saw different service providers actually have their traffic fall at different times. And some were on July 17th later in the day, and some of them on July the 18th. And that makes it look like this isn't a technical problem. We can act right if you have a cable cut, everything would disappear in one go. This looks more like a somewhat coordinated shutdown.
Do you think that's what happened then, that it was an official shutdown, if you like?
Well, we know from at least one of the service providers, there's a phone company called Grameenphone, which operates in Bangladesh, and they say they were told by local authorities to shut down their 3G and 4G networks. So I think it's extremely likely that what we see here is not technical, it's a government-directed shutdown.
And the impact
of something like this? It's massive, isn't it? It leaves a long shadow, an outage lasting several days.
Yes, in this case, several days. Now, this isn't that unusual. Over time, we have seen multi-day shutdowns in other countries. So it's not totally unusual. Of course, we see multi-hour shutdowns sometimes. Sometimes for government reasons, sometimes for reasons like exams being held in the country, where they want to stop cheating, so they shut the internet off.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. That happens very frequently. And the government often announces the schedule. You know, the internet will be off from 10 to 1 while students are taking their national exams.
In the case of Bangladesh, there isn't really any way to circumvent it on the ground, is there?
No, so you often see, in countries where there are attempts to get around censorship, for example, or blocking particular websites, things like that, that people will try to use VPN services and other sort of circumvention technologies. Unfortunately, if you cut the internet off pretty much completely, there just isn't a technical way around that, right? You've unplugged it.
The implications economically are likely to be considerable, aren't they?
Well, I think you're thinking about the economic effect of these things. I was talking to someone about a shutdown that was happening in Ethiopia because of examinations. And this person told me that they had decided that given how much the internet was going to be disrupted for a week while the exams were happening, that they were going to fly to Kenya and work from a hotel because they knew they'd have internet access. And I think that really tells you the sorts of decisions people have to make if they lose access to the internet, which is often how they get in business communicating with customers.
John Graham coming there from Cloudflare. You're listening to Tech Live on the BBC World Service. We're always keen to hear from you about what's going on in tech where you are. Maybe you've had to deal with internet outages or even power cuts for long periods of time. Did you find a solution or a way to work with it? You can email us at techlife@bbc.co.uk, or you can send us a WhatsApp text or voice message. We really do love a voice message. The number is +44 330 123 0320. Don't forget to tell us your name and where in the world you live. Still to come on Tech Live, how game developers in Cuba deal with rolling blackouts.
We lost a whole week of work just because these tools are not built thinking that at any time there will be a blackout.
We're going to South Africa next, a country which has been dealing with an energy crisis for over 15 years. This has led to regular rolling power outages scheduled by the government to try and manage strain on the national grid. It's known as load shedding, and it's had massive impacts on the daily lives of millions of South Africans and on how they make money. South Africa analyst Milton Nkosi spoke to Tech Life's Imran Rahman Jones.
So load shedding began in 2008 in South Africa, and the power utility Eskom described it as a savior from a total grid collapse.
And what was some of the reasons that contributed to the policy in the first place?
The crisis was a result of a perfect storm in which rising costs in coal-fired power stations in South Africa and falling revenues, a crumbling infrastructure which was inherited from the apartheid era, and decades of corruption and mismanagement. What had happened is that under apartheid, the power stations in South Africa were really strategically geared to deliver power to the minority, the white minority. And the rest of us, the millions of us, the majority in the country, were kind of left to fend for ourselves. In comes democracy in 1994, and Nelson Mandela distributes electricity to everyone. And suddenly the shortcoming of that grid that looked solid felt a little bit shortchanged. So apart from the incompetence resource mismanagement and corruption, a large part of it is actually a structural problem which emanates from colonialism stroke apartheid.
From what you've said, must have had huge impacts on the everyday lives for South Africans, given it affects everything in the home.
Oh yes, indeed, it has affected ordinary lives. For instance, I met a lady a few years ago who was distraught that the only money she had, and she bought meat with that money for her children and her grandchildren, the meat had gone off because there was load shedding and it was in the freezer. It has affected education, schools, hospitals, and by and large, the industrial sector of the economy. So everyone was affected by it, whether rich or poor. For instance, most people driving home will find their traffic lights will go completely black, and that would create a massive traffic jam. And that was the impact of it. Whether you had solar at home, whether you were on renewables, whether you had power backup like inverters and lithium batteries, you would still be caught up like the rest of us.
And you mentioned some of them there, but were there ways that people could plan for adapting their lives to the outages?
What the South African government and Eskom itself started doing, they created a schedule for load shedding so that people can anticipate, predict, and plan accordingly for the power cuts. And they used to publish the schedule that in this particular area you will lose power for 3 hours and it will be back after this. A very complex grid actually, and it morphed into an app where people could just go and see when they're going to be without power, whether it's morning or afternoon. Then you can try and plan your day to try and circumvent some of the difficult hours.
But then it did, about 4 months ago, it did improve, right? So load shedding was put on hold. And how has it been since then?
Yeah, so the nightmare is over, really. I think it's a good way of putting it. We are now over 110 days without any load shedding in the country. The economy seems to be ticking over nicely. It's growing. The inflation is down. And that's partly because President Ramaphosa decided to create a new ministry, a Minister of Electricity. He's been sort of making sure that the repairs and maintenance are happening in a sequence that avoids unnecessary load shedding. There were some allegations, particularly by the opposition ahead of the May 29th elections this year. We had a general election here. The opposition was saying, oh, there's no load shedding, it's just for the election. And the true thing is they're getting their act together. And things seem to be moving, they seem to be working in unison. Of course, there are many moving parts here, and very hard to predict the future.
Do you think there is a chance that you might see some sort of load shedding in the future?
Yeah, in fact, that's true. There is some sort of load shedding actually happening now called load reduction. And that is going on because there are a lot of illegal connections in South Africa which create problems for the grid, where people steal electricity from fee-paying residents and they just plug in a wire and then pull it to their section of the street. And that creates overloading of the mini substations, and then they all blow up, and it costs a lot of money for Eskom to replace them. So they're trying to manage that through this process of load reduction. But load shedding, as we know it, seems to be, touch wood, a thing of the past.
On Technology, we're always on the lookout for tech solutions to big problems like this. A smart energy company called Plentify says it has a device which can take some of the pressure off the country's power supply system. It's called Hotbot, and it connects to water boards, which are known in South Africa as geysers. I've been speaking to John Cornick, Chief Executive Officer of Plentify, to find out more about it.
ultimately, the problem that we're trying to solve at Plentify is to solve this mismatch between clean energy supply and electricity demand. And there are a variety of ways to solve this mismatch, the most common being batteries. But batteries are really expensive. And this is where Plentify comes in. We, instead of trying to shift clean energy supply to when demand exists, rather we shift demand to when clean energy supply exists. And we do this for 75% cheaper than batteries. So take your water heater, for example, and water heating is the biggest consumer of all household electricity in South Africa, and it accounts for between 40 and 60% of electricity bills. What we can do is we can heat your water at times when there is excess solar available, and thereby negate the need for these expensive batteries, but still help use available clean power.
But doesn't the hotpot itself have to be battery powered?
Hotpot is battery powered, but it's mainly to maintain communications, so that when the grid goes down, we can understand the context of what's happening and change our control algorithms accordingly.
How big is it? What does it look like?
And I'll show it to you.
Yes,
So
please.
you can hold-
We can describe it.
Yeah, so it's a little 17 centimeter by 17 centimeter black box. When you open it up, you'll see that there is a set of power terminals through you wire the water heater, and a bunch of color-coded sensors that plug into the box and then clip onto pipes around your water heater. What this device does then is it communicates to the internet and uses all that data it's collecting about your household water consumption to decide when to turn your water heater on and off. So don't use electricity if you're at risk of blackouts, but do if there's excess wind or solar available.
I've seen other attempts at solutions to this problem before, and a lot of them involve AI, don't they? Kind of trying to use AI to pinpoint how much and when clean energy sources are most likely to be most productive, to plug the grid that way. How does Hotbot fit in with that broader ecosystem, if you like?
It aligns very well with this ecosystem. I'd say that where AI is really good is at making predictions. We want to predict when you're going to want hot water, when there's going to be the most renewable energy available. But ultimately, AI by itself doesn't solve this problem. You need to take those predictions and you need to combine them with optimizations to figure out how to make decisions on the basis of these predictions, as well as a whole bunch of analytics to understand that something's gone wrong with the system so you can take corrective action. Ultimately, the proposing is what we call handling intelligence. We're trying to build something that doesn't require you as the end user to change your behavior. Instead, the device needs to understand how you behave and change its operation. And so actually, we find ourselves in people development and they don't engage with our product because that means we're doing our job really well. It's just working from the background.
We're finishing this week's programme in Cuba. It's another country which experiences regularly scheduled power cuts due to its energy deficit. Some cuts last up to 18 hours a day. But among food shortages, poor internet access and regular blackouts, two data brokers have managed to secure an international publishing deal. Roscoe Cacchiari and David Darius are from Empty-Head Games.
Today, the schedule says that from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. we will have light, so we are 2 hours away from the blackout. We just store the generator for important moments because there's also even if you happen to be it's very useful that you know like you know, but I think if you look what a life I want to have to do. All my new friends, the first things to walk the first to put you up in the map video game. Then and when David, we start to work together, and we right away started working on what would become Saviorless 7 years later. Saviorless is a classic 2D platform. It starts like a narrative game, like just asking the player to see the world, to international publisher of signing with us. That was actually the hardest part of the project. If you are an international publisher and you see a pitch from a completely new game studio of two guys, and on top of that they are in Cuba, you are asking a huge cross.
Out of the blue, one day, you realize, contact us directly. Apparently, this is something about our game in internet, and they sign us.
And then we spent like 3 years straight on developing the game. The typical cycle of development of Favorless is very uncommon in terms of what you expect the development of a video game of this scale should be. Not just because the internet is slow, but because it's very inconsistent. It's not stable enough to sustain the loading of the files that you usually find on a game, that are huge files. We lost a whole week of work just because these tools are not built thinking that at any time there will be a blackout. When you look back, you see a lot of obstacles, but you realize that we were able to go over these obstacles, but we didn't remove them.
The situation in Cuba right now is far difficult than when we start, but I feel pretty confident. I feel that even if our first game was not perfect, you will see a second game from it.
That's it for today's Tech Life. Remember, you can always get in touch with us. techlife@bbc.co.uk is the email address, or WhatsApp us on +44 330 123 0320. Today's programme was presented by me, Zoe Kleinman, and produced by Imran Rahman James. The editor is Monica Soriano.
This is the BBC World Service with the story of Las Patronas.
Hungry migrants risk death by clinging onto La Bestia, a freight train on its way to the US border. As it speeds through a small Mexican town, the women, known as Las Patronas, throw food parcels to them, and they've been doing it for almost 30 years.
Las Patronas at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries or wherever you get your BBC podcasts. In 50 minutes, witness history.
With me, Josephine McDermott. Today, the university students who nearly 60 years ago set out to challenge the discrimination of Australia's Indigenous people. I've been speaking to Brian Aarons and Gary Williams.
Next, it's Outlook. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Today on Outlook, with me, Rubin Azar, the huge power of a little kindness. Mihvan Babakar fled Iraq when she was an infant. A 5-year-long journey brought her and her family to the UK. That journey was often difficult, but one of her fondest memories is the kindness of a stranger she met whilst living in the Netherlands.
I remember he opened up the back of this van and there was this beautiful red bike in it, and I remember thinking, that can't be mine. It absolutely can't be mine, that's just too big.
That red bicycle had a profound effect on Mihvan, how she felt about herself and her place in the world around her.
I think it gave me permission at the time to just be a kid, and I think that's what I needed. I just needed permission to just play, and actually having joy and having an experience of unadulterated happiness. That is what I feel like that bike gave me.
Mihvan's story after the BBC World Service News.
Hello, I'm David Hunt. President Biden has hailed the largest prisoner swap between the West and Russia since the end of the Cold War as a feat of diplomacy. Speaking at the White House, Mr. Biden said the brutal ordeal was over for the American journalist Evan Gershkovich and Alsu Kumasheva, ex-Marine Paul Whelan, and leading Kremlin critic Vladimir Kara-Murza. Peter Bose says it puts the Democrats in a positive light in the ongoing presidential campaign.
Anything like this, a major win on the international stage in the final few months of what will
it is bound to be good for him in terms of his legacy, but perhaps more important, certainly for Kamala Harris, is her potential to win against Donald Trump in the election. It is important because this is going to be a very close election, and any positive news that can be attached to the presumed candidate for the Democrats, Kamala Harris, is bound to be good for her.
In total, 10 Russians were exchanged for 16 Westerners and Russians imprisoned in Russia. One was returned was Vadim Krasikov, a Russian intelligence agent imprisoned in Germany for killing a former Chechen rebel commander. The victim was in Moscow to released Russians. President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are due to meet those returning to the United States. The United States says Venezuela's opposition candidate was the winner of Sunday's disputed election, despite the incumbent Nicolas Maduro being declared the victor. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said there was overwhelming evidence in favor of Edmundo Gonzalez. Both the U.S. and the European Union have demanded that Venezuelan authorities release detailed voting data of early votes reports.
The opposition say the majority of receipts from the country's electronic voting machines prove they, not the government, had won. The intervention by Antony Blinken is significant. After the last election in 2018 was widely dismissed as neither free nor fair, countries including the United States decided to recognise the then opposition leader Juan Guaido as interim president and imposed sanctions on Venezuela. President Maduro has accused foreign governments of interfering and accused the opposition of starting a coup.
The leader of the Lebanon-based group Hezbollah, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, has warned the Israelis they have no idea what red lines they have crossed when killing the top Hezbollah commander in Beirut. Nick Beek is there.
He said what had happened really has raised the temperature in the Middle East and taken the conflict to what he described as a new level. He also spoke about the killing just a few hours later in Iran of the head of the political wing of Hamas. He said that the two killings will really provoke a very strong reaction from Iran, which of course backs both Hezbollah here in Lebanon and also Hamas too.
World News on BBC. Several people have been shot dead in the northern Nigerian city of Kano during protests about the cost of living. Some demonstrators were wounded and taken to hospital. Witnesses said spent cartridges of live bullets were found at the scene. The government has not commented. In the capital Abuja, security forces used tear gas to try to disperse the crowds. Bangladesh's law minister has defended the ban on Jamaat-e-Islami, the main Islamist party, and its student wing from participating in political activities. Anis ul-Haq blamed its supporters for the violence during recent student protests for quotas in civil service jobs. The matter is emerging.
A leader of the Jamaat had earlier described the move to ban them as illegal, extrajudicial, and unconstitutional. The party was effectively barred from taking part in elections in 2013 after a court ruling that its registration as a political party conflicted with Bangladesh's secular constitution. In the meantime, police have released from custody 6 student leaders who were leading demonstrations against job quotas in civil service jobs. They were detained last week, with police claiming the detention was for their own safety.
The World Health Organization says more than 175,000 people die annually from extreme heat in Europe. It says heat-related deaths have seen a 30% increase over the past 2 decades. The WHO warned that more people would die from heat-related symptoms in the coming years as a result of global warming. Simone Biles has won the all-round gymnastics event at the Paris Olympics. It's her 6th career gold, extending her record as the most decorated American gymnast. Brazil's Rebecca Andrade took silver, and Biles' compatriot and defending champion Sunisa Lee settled for bronze. This is her 2nd gold medal in Paris after winning the team event 2 days ago. And that's the latest BBC News.
Hello, I'm Mubin Azar, and this is Outlook, serving you extraordinary, life-changing stories from across our planet. Right now, I'm in the studio at Broadcasting House in London, and you've been getting in touch to let us know where you're listening from.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm a swallow following the sun between Cape Town in South Africa and Stockholm, Sweden.
We've received some beautiful voice notes recently, letting us know when and why you listen to Outlook.
I'm phoning to say I just love Outlook. I listen almost almost every day when I'm preparing the evening veggies and having my lunch, whether I'm in the southern hemisphere or the northern. So thank you for a lovely program. Bye for now.
Hi, my name is Maria. I'm living in Portland, Oregon, United States. I'm from Hawaii. I deliver bakery goods and I'm very early in the morning, so I'm lucky enough to get the BBC News and the Outlook show, and it is a highlight of my day.
Thanks to both Elizabeth and Maria for getting in touch. And please keep your voice notes coming. The team and I love to imagine you listening in wherever in the world you are. You can send a voice note on WhatsApp. The number is +44 330 678 2707, and all those details are on our website. And now for today's guest, Mihven Babakar. Mihven works for Google, where she's the News and Information Credibility Lead. It's a job which she describes as tackling misinformation globally and supporting journalists. But when she dropped into the Outlook studio, it was to talk about something altogether more personal. This is a story that she's had to revisit as an adult, using her fact-checking skills to retrace her family's footsteps and make sure she has all the information just right. Today, Mihven lives in the UK, but she was born in Baghdad, Iraq, to Kurdish parents who were forced to leave the country when she was only an infant.
I mean, I was very young when we left Iraq. I was Jewish. And the memories I have, I don't know if they're fabricated memories because I was so young, but I remember the feelings of that time quite well. I remember being surrounded by family members, and I remember there being a lot of joy. And I remember aunts and uncles and big gatherings and dancing and big feasts around the Kurdish New Year, called Nowruz, which happens every solstice. Those are the things that I remember. But I also then remember there was like a dark undercurrent to those times as well, and that kind of became more real as the next few years solidified.
I imagine it's very, very difficult, and I imagine your family want to protect you from what you reference as this dark undercurrent. Did you have any understanding of the broader politics and the broader threat to you and your family?
I don't think I did at the time, no. And I've looked at pictures since, and there were some pretty intense things happening at the time, including in my first year, my whole family was evacuated into the mountains. There was a huge exodus from all the cities to the mountains because it was safer to live in the mountains, and we lived in a tent for a whole year.
You lived in a tent for a year?
Yeah. So there are pictures of my mum holding me as a baby outside the tent with like UNAID coming down in the background, and you know, she would travel for miles to get water every day, and lots of kids ended up with things like cholera and dysentery, and there were very basic necessities that we needed. I have no recollection of that, but that was my first year of life.
Quite soon after that, when you were still an infant, your whole family did decide to leave.
Yeah.
They decided it was time to go. And I know, of course, you were very, very young. Do you remember anything of that long journey and the route you took?
My first memories of being very cold in Russia. That's when I started to remember things. I remember that I was freezing all the time. And I remember not being able to feel my limbs. I remember like my hands, like I especially remember feeling my hands being cold. And I remember my dad used to hold my hands, and he would try and warm it up by blowing on it, and he would put my hand in his pocket to warm it up. And to this day, if somebody like holds my hand and puts it in their pocket, I get this really overwhelming feeling of like love and joy. But that was my first memory, really. And I remember things that a kid would remember as well. So I remember seeing fireworks for the first time, and I also have my own memories of some pretty difficult things that happened as well. So at various points, my father and my family were attacked, and that was one of the key piercing memories of that period as well.
Tell me about that attack.
Yeah, we when we arrived into Russia, we like lent him the kindnesses of strangers really to look after us. And there was one Russian woman in particular who invited us into her home and allowed us to stay with her. So it was me, my mum, and my dad. And I remember her, like my own memories
versatile. She was very warm, she was very lovely, and she would teach me Russian nursery rhymes about potatoes. And I still remember the first line of one. It was something like I'm gonna butcher this. I don't remember Russian, but it's called like Mima Mushka, like, and then it goes like Mima Shleti or something like that. But that's the only line that I remember. And you have to put your hands on top of each other.
Well, do you know what it means?
I have no idea. I don't know what I've just said.
Something to do with a potato. Okay.
Maybe. So she invited us into her home, and we had a really lovely period with her. But her extended family and her son were not happy that she invited refugees into her house. And so one night, the son came into the house with a bunch of his friends, and they attacked his mother, and they also attacked us.
Physically?
Physically, yeah. They slammed her into a cupboard, and the cupboard fell on her. And at the time, I was like, well, I think she's died, like that. But she didn't. She was luckily fine.
How old were you?
I was maybe 3 or 4 at the time. Yeah. And I remember my own memory of that period was I was next to the sofa, and I feel like I was crying so much, and I was blue from crying is what it felt like. And I could see my father being attacked by 3 men. I could see a man with a knife, like, trying to take my mother's ring physically off her. And this lovely Russian woman was under a bookshelf, and I just remember feeling like it was hugely overwhelming and chaotic and traumatic. And then all of a sudden, one of the attackers came and held my hand, and it actually was very soothing for me. So all of a sudden, an adult was like taking care of me. But then everything in the room became quiet when everybody realized that what I saw as a soothing tactic was actually a threat. It was one of the attackers saying, if you don't give us what we want, then we'll hurt your child. And my dad stopped struggling, my mum stopped struggling, and they gave them everything that they wanted, which was pretty much all of our worldly possessions at that point.
They just took everything?
They took everything. And I didn't know this at the time, but my dad tells me about that period that the police came, and, you know, obviously they pleaded to the police, and this was the early 90s, they pleaded to the police to help them and get safety and, you know, find the perpetrators. And the police at the time wanted to see your refugee papers that you got from the UNHCR. My dad handed them over, and the police ripped it up and said that it had no value here.
They ripped up the papers?
They ripped up the refugee papers that we had. And so again, even like the authorities that existed at the time were not welcoming or didn't see you as citizens of that country. And I think that's one of the hard things about being refugees. There's no institutional protection.
You, of course, had left Iraq, and your family had left Iraq for safety.
Yeah.
And you were refugees.
Yeah.
And then you'd stopped in Russia, and there was a level of protection, certainly within this household. But once again, you found yourselves threatened and unsafe. As a family that's in transit and is desperately seeking just the ability to sleep well at night and be safe, how did your family process this new threat and this new reality that they didn't have any possessions anymore, and the place they thought could be safe was absolutely no longer safe?
If I'm really honest with you, I think that it's still being processed to this day. It's not something that ever ends. Once your safety is pulled out from underneath you, and don't get me wrong, it's not just that instance of us leaving Iraq, but actually what happened in Iraq had been going on for generations up until that point. Saddam's genocide of the Kurds, which is what led us outside of Iraq, he had been killing hundreds of thousands of Kurds. There was chemical attacks that was taking place in Halabja, and that safety was never there whilst my parents were growing up either. So they were always unstable, and they always felt like that everything could be pulled out from underneath them at any point. And so when the same thing happened again, it's just a reinforcing, actually, that the world thinks that you're not as valuable as some other people. that actually you're not deserving of the safety that maybe other people are afforded.
You said that with a kind of nervous laugh, if I can say, but the fundamentals of what you're saying there, it crosses a very basic human tenet, a very basic human rights. Everyone is due and has the right to safety and security. Growing up in that environment and seeing your family struggle so much, did you have any understanding in your very young mind, did you have any understanding that you just had to keep moving?
I just thought that's how people lived. I just thought that that's how it works, that you move around and that people are transient in your life, and you make friends wherever you go, but then you leave them. I didn't have a sense of having a room or having belongings in that same way. Everything was transitory, like the place that I slept, where we ate, everything. And when actually we did settle down for the first time eventually, I found that really incredibly disorientating. I was like, I don't know, what is this? Why are we just in one place? And what do we do here? I don't understand.
Before we get there, I know you moved with your mother to the Netherlands. Was your father with you at that point, or did he stay?
Because we had all of our things stolen, not just one time, but many times, we decided, or my parents decided, that it was better to get some of us to safety instead of all of us, so we split up. So my mother and I ended up moving to the Netherlands because that was all the money we had at the time. And my dad said that he would join us later.
And he stayed in Russia?
I didn't see my dad again for another 5 years. So between the ages of 5 and essentially 9, 10, I didn't see my dad. And actually by the time I saw my dad again, I didn't know what he looked like. I didn't know what he felt like. I didn't know. It was just a strange man who had re-entered my life. And people were telling me that he was my dad.
There'd been such a gap.